When that didn't work, to get the memory away from that, they had the greatest scar outside of the Holocaust of the 20th century. And that's saying something. Think in the 20th century, we murdered, starved to death, executed 250 million people between World War I and World War II and these global conflicts and the Cold War and the Chinese Communist Party, the Nazis, the fascists. 250 million people eradicated, murdered, butchered, starved. Think about it. It's the bloodiest century in mankind's history. 1,000 years from now, they're going to call it the Dark Ages. And in that century, the Cultural Revolution is only second to the Holocaust. Why? Because they understood the strength of the Chinese people. The strength of the Chinese people is the family. They may be the most traditional people on earth, on love of the family and the mother and the father, in tradition, passed generation to generation. They had to break that. And to break it, and also education, what would they use? Think about it for a second. We will weaponize the children. We will weaponize the little children and the teenagers and the young college students in China. We will turn them into demons to torture and starve and ridicule. Not just people in the village, not just the kulaks. The two most honored things in Chinese society, the teacher and the parents. The Cultural Revolution is so awful that the Chinese Communist Party will not let it be mentioned, will not let it be talked about. And even today in the West, we know very little about it. Very little about it. As horrible as that was, the Chinese people pulled themselves out with no help from anybody else. Then the one-child policy. As Miles said, because they say Miles of 150, 200 million. He says, no, Steve, 500 million. Forced abortions. Let's just say what it is. It's murder, slaughter. 80% of little Chinese girls, right? It's one of the reasons you have this massive demographic problem in mainland China today. It's one of the reasons we have the problem with the young men today in China. The asocial nature of them. It's not just the evil and the propaganda of the authoritarian states. The fact there's no ability to make a family. There's no ability. Why? They have murdered and slaughtered the women. By the way, do all these people talk to me ever here and feminism and talk about women's rights and Me Too and end of the patriarchy? Where are you about the murder of the Chinese female babies in mainland China? I can't hear you, feminist. I can't hear you, leftist. I can't hear you. You know why you can't hear them about the famine? Think about it for a second. We had a famine that starved to death 40 million people. And then the Cultural Revolution. That we don't even know how many dead are from that. And things like cannibalism and torture. And the most horrific... You ever hear about that? You ever hear about the one-child policy? Why? Why? Because the world elites don't think the Chinese people are worth it. They're prepared to lecture everybody else on racism. Tell me about the racism of that. Or the people that are from our oldest civilization that have given us science and technology and math and some of the great philosophers and writing and some of those beautiful art for 10 and 5,000 years? Are they not worthy? Why does the world today look the other way? And this is why they hate Miles Guo. And trust me, they hate him. Right? There's no logic. There's no logic of why he's in jail today under anything of American law. The Ministry of State Security officers that are rounding up people down in Chinatown, they're rounding up people in the indictments. The first person they identify is the Miles Guo. Thereafter, the second are the Miles Guo followers. Yet Miles, before his trial, can't leave. Miles is still there. You know why Miles is still there? They don't want his voice, because think about it. Miles Guo coming to the West was an inflection point. Nobody in the West talked about the Chinese Communist Party and identified the Chinese Communist Party as the problem. Nobody identified the slavery of Lao Beijing as a crime against humanity. Because it's easy to be quiet. Because people are making a lot of money. It was Miles Guo that came to the West. In Miles Guo's videos, where he called out the hypocrisy of supposedly communist leaders who are the wealthiest families on earth. And they're the wealthiest families without creating anything. They've never created anything. They've never made anything. They've never produced anything. What have they done? They've run a gulag of 1.4 billion people, and they've stolen their wealth. How much money does Lao Beijing make every month? What kind of living conditions does Lao Beijing have? What is the reality of the lived experience of the Chinese people today when we're totally interconnected? You can't hide any of this.